On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Thomas Hendrik Ilves, President of the Republic of Estonia, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in the 364 days since I last had the honor to address this Assembly, the world has changed dramatically. We have seen a profound change in the global security situation. We see unprecedented threats to peace and security in post-World War II Europe and the world, while terrorism, climate change, human rights violations, and the spread of the Ebola virus continue to be global challenges. We need a concerted effort to achieve peace and stability in Europe and the Middle East, and to restore the credibility of international law. No circumstances can ever justify terrorism in any form. By signing UN anti-terrorism conventions, states have promised to prevent and investigate terrorist crimes, as well as to refrain from supporting or tacitly tolerating those crimes. Israel poses a serious threat to the people of Iraq and Syria, as well as the broader Middle East. This terrorist organization executes prisoners, kills civilians, and commits genocidal acts against religious and national minorities. Its brutality, barbarous crimes, and extreme ideology threaten all of humanity. It challenges the universal human values enshrined in the United Nations documents. We must stop the terrorists. Estonia commends all global efforts to fight the ISIL and other terrorist organizations and stands ready to contribute to those efforts. And here I'd like to welcome the adoption today of the UN Security Council resolution on foreign terrorist fighters. Ladies and gentlemen, a quarter of a century ago, in the Annus Mirabilis, 1989, Europe and the democratic world celebrated a historical sea change. The Berlin Wall fell. The Cold War that divided the world into hostile camps for a half a century ended. This year, we should celebrate an anniversary of the triumph of freedom and democracy. Instead, 2014 has turned out to be a year when the international order as we've known it since the Cold War has been violated and put in doubt. Cynical geopolitics and international relations has once again come to the fore. The international agreements upon which the stability of this post-Second World War security architecture has relied have been compromised. Let me remind you of what we have collectively agreed upon. The Charter of the United Nations from 1945 declares, and I quote, "All members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state," unquote. In the final act of Helsinki Final Act of 1975, all transatlantic countries agreed not to use force to change borders or challenge the political independence of any state. States agreed to regard one another's frontiers inviolable, to refrain from making each other's territory the object of military occupation. No such occupation or acquisition would be recognized as legal. In the 1990 CSC Charter of Paris for a New Europe, all signatories from Vancouver to Vladivostok agreed to, quote, fully recognize the freedom of states to choose their own security arrangements. By annexing Crimea and invading eastern Ukraine, one of the signatories has violated all of these agreements. Thus, we find ourselves in a completely new and unforeseen security environment. We must enforce the fundamental agreements upon which our peace and security rely. Ladies and gentlemen, the Ukrainian crisis is not solely a conflict between two countries. It is not even solely a European issue. If instead of agreements and laws, raw brute force will apply in international relations, if changing state borders by force will become an accepted norm, then the stability of the whole world is threatened. As President Obama said this morning, and I quote, "This is a vision of the world in which might makes right." And he added, "We believe that right makes might." So does Estonia. We believe that too. Such developments must be firmly condemned. The international community cannot leave Crimea as it is now. We cannot accept frozen conflicts created for geopolitical ends. Referenda that are in agreement with international law cannot be arranged in 2 weeks in the presence of foreign armed forces. Results of such referenda cannot be considered valid. Independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity must remain the fundamental rights of states and nations. That includes their right to direct their own future and to choose their allies, as stated in the CSE Paris Charter. Such free choices by sovereign nations cannot be accepted as an excuse for aggression. However, it was not Ukraine's wish even to choose its security arrangements that was used as justification for aggression. Its mere desire to enhance trade and political relations with the European Union, which is not a security arrangement, led to the country's dismemberment. What can we do to restore, then, the validity of international agreements? What? There were warning signs of current events in Ukraine earlier. Alarm bells rang already 6 years ago in Georgia, but few bothered to hear the wake-up call. We must take, therefore, conflict prevention more seriously. We must support states in their choice of democracy, of rule of law and human rights, and the decisions that follow from that. These recent developments force us to seriously reconsider the role of the United Nations. How can one of the fundamental goals of the UN, global peace and security, be promoted when basic international agreements are ignored, state borders are changed, and territories are annexed through force? We cannot ignore that the Security Council has been paralyzed as international justice has been manipulated and multiple crises have escalated. The Security Council needs to be reformed. Its work methods and principles must be revised with special attention to the openness, accountability, and transparency of its processes. The permanent members of the UN Security Council bear enormous responsibility in guaranteeing international peace. No permanent member should abuse the veto to circumvent the principles of the UN Charter. Ladies and gentlemen, human rights remain the most cherished of values of the UN. Unfortunately, respect for human rights can still not be assumed to be the norm. We cannot accept arguments that for some countries, human rights do not apply for cultural reasons. Human rights, as stated in the Universal Declaration, are universal, inalienable, and inviolable. They are based on the humanity and dignity of each and every person. No peace or justice, stability or security can be guaranteed unless the basic rights of all human beings are respected and protected in every country by all governments. We must, moreover, pay special attention to the rights of the most vulnerable groups. Women's rights must be protected everywhere. It is crucial that empowering women and action against gender-based violence be implemented in accordance with UN Resolution 1325. We must respect the rights of children and minorities, as well as indigenous people. We must care for people with special needs. Free speech remains a crucial right. Some states have made efforts to stop the free flow of information on the Internet and to divide cyberspace along state borders. This we must avoid. The Internet must remain a universal platform for uninhibited exchange of information. Estonia is proud to be a founding member of the Freedom Online Coalition, a community of 23 nations committed to promoting free speech online and the multi-stakeholder model of a free and open Internet. It is a global initiative that brings together governments, NGOs, entrepreneurs, and think tanks. Last April, the Freedom Online Coalition gathered in our capital and issued the Tallinn Agenda, a statement expressing our strongly shared conviction that all people are entitled to the same rights and freedoms online as well as offline. This is not a lifestyle question. The Internet is a driver of economic growth and a key tool for development. Since the 1990s, it has blossomed into a global network of nearly 3 billion users. Most of the next billion Internet users will come from developing countries. The UN post-2015 development agenda should recognize the importance of new technologies and e-services as a major contribution to the security and the prosperity of the world. As we grow more dependent on digital services in our daily lives, we become more vulnerable to cyber attacks. Cybersecurity is essential, not just for protecting rights, but also for economic prosperity. Cyber attacks can paralyze crucial services or infrastructure. They can cause enormous economic damage. Limiting access to or censoring the contents of the Internet, however, is not the answer to cyber insecurity. Ladies and gentlemen, achieving sustainable development is essential in order to tackle some of the challenges we face. Even in the current fragile security environment, we must take care of the future of the planet and work towards a world where everyone can live a dignified life, free from poverty, violence, and exclusion. In today's interdependent world, this is hard to achieve without peace and stability. The world today also faces the outbreak of a deadly virus. This is no longer a local concern of a few countries. Ebola has become an international public health emergency. Despite efforts already made by governments and international organizations, the outbreak races ahead. We support the efforts of the Global Ebola Response Coalition, tasked to contain and stop the spread of the virus. Climate change is already an existential threat to some countries. It has a dramatic impact on their living conditions and their security. The small island developing states are most vulnerable. If we do not act soon enough, other countries will be threatened as well. We must see this problem globally, not just from the perspective of short-term national or economic interest. The risks of conflict, violence, insecurity, financial and economic collapse, climate change, lack of resources, and natural disasters are inextricably intertwined and need to be addressed comprehensively. The new development agenda after 2015 must be truly universal. Sustainable development goals are best addressed together. And progress in these fields will be guaranteed by good governance, transparency of decision-making, and low corruption. Effective and accountable institutions are powerful enablers of sustainable development, and modern digital technology helps us to create them. In Estonia, we have developed an e-governance system that increases transparency and limits corruption. We have been sharing the system with all interested partners, and we continue to be willing to do so. Ladies and gentlemen, since May 8, 1945, we have believed that we had been freed of certain ideological demons for good. Yet today we see the return of long discredited ideas dating back to 1938. The existence of co-ethnics abroad has been used as a justification to annex territory. And this is in 2014, not in 1938. So, too, we have seen a return of the ideologies of hatred, of lies, and propaganda. We must be clear in condemning extreme nationalism, homophobia, xenophobia, and religious extremism. We need to recall and reaffirm the values that the United Nations were created to protect. The United Nations, a unique global instrument of security and peace, must succeed where the League of Nations once failed. Let us not forget, 75 years ago, on August 23rd, a pact was signed between Hitler's Germany and Stalin's USSR to divide Eastern Europe into their spheres of influence. A week later, September 1, Hitler attacked Poland. On September 17th, 2.5 weeks later, Hitler's erstwhile ally, the Soviet Union, also attacked Poland, and World War II had begun. On August 31st of this year, 20 years passed since the occupation forces left Estonia, troops that were there as a result of that same Stalin-Hitler pact. Yet, just a few days later, on September 5th, an Estonian police officer was abducted by foreign security services on Estonian territory and taken by force to Moscow, where he is still held in the infamous Lefortovo prison. We cannot allow anyone ever to divide countries into spheres of influence. The community of nations is only secure when its smallest members can feel secure. We cannot and will not accept threats and intimidation in 21st century international relations. We cannot have peace, security, or prosperity in Europe or the world unless we find a way, again, to enforce and to revalidate the agreements that we have all signed, and are party to. Thank you for your attention.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Estonia for the statement just made. May I request representatives to remain seated while we greet the President. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo, President of the Republic of Equatorial Guinea. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo, President of the Republic of Equatorial Guinea, and to invite him to address the Assembly. Mr. President.
Your Excellency, Sam Kutesa, President of the 69th session of the United Nations General Assembly, Your Excellencies, Heads of State and of Government, Your Excellency, Secretary General of the United Nations, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I bring with me to this session of the United Nations General Assembly greetings of peace, friendship, and solidarity from the people of Equatorial Guinea, and the full readiness of their government to contribute to this task shared by us all, that of maintaining peace and stability throughout the world, as well as promoting the harmonious development of humanity. Allow me at the outset to congratulate you, Your Excellency Sam Kutesa, on your brilliant election to preside over the work of this 69th Ordinary Session of the United Nations General Assembly. Your timely and well-deserved election is justified by the policy of peace, the respect for the principles of international law, and the promotion of development, of which your country, the Republic of Uganda, has been an advocate. Indeed, your decision to have this session of the General Assembly devote itself to the theme entitled Delivering on and Implementing a Transformative Post-2015 Development Agenda is testament to Uganda's interest in overcoming the current problems of underdevelopment throughout the world. Equatorial Guinea recognizes the relevance and importance of the themes that will be debated in the two high-level meetings that are slated for February 2015 to look into ways of implementing the post-2015 development agenda, as well as gender equality and empowering women. That meeting is scheduled for March in 2015 as well. We also wish to express our sincere appreciation and our congratulations to His Excellency Ban Ki-moon, United Nations Secretary General, for his outstanding work heading up this global organization in very difficult circumstances at this time, where there is a preponderance of terrorism, piracy, mercenary activity, and major epidemics affecting the world today. Indeed, this session of the General Assembly bears the heavy responsibility of finding solutions to problems of poverty and hunger that we see in the world. Violence and armed conflicts, terrorism, piracy and mercenary activity, and major epidemics. And recently we've seen the addition of the Ebola hemorrhagic fever, which is now laying waste to some countries in Africa. Because of Ebola's deadly effects and the lack of adequate resources to combat Ebola, the government of the Republic of Equatorial Guinea on the occasion of the award of the second edition of the UNESCO Equatorial Guinea International Prize for Research in Life Sciences, announced a donation of $2 million to the World Health Organization, and this is to finance programs to combat Ebola. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, the United Nations will not be able to find solutions to these difficult problems unless the role of this General Assembly is strengthened and revitalized, a role that in recent years has become routine. The United Nations will never be able to find lasting solutions to these problems if the Security Council is not governed by rules that respect the spirit of democracy and international justice. Indeed, the United Nations will not be able to find satisfactory solutions to these problems as long as the current system of the rule of force in international relations subsists. It is for these reasons that the Republic of Equatorial Guinea is very concerned at the proliferation of acts of intervention that do not respect the principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of states. These interventions interrupt the process of genuine democracy in the affected countries, in that they overlook the essential characteristics and the idiosyncrasies of those societies, thus further fueling divisions and socio-political instability of nations. We must therefore distinguish clearly between supporting a genuine internal democratic process and interference perpetrated through pressures that lead to misunderstandings, intolerance, exclusions, resentments, hatred, and such like among citizens, and also leading to fratricidal wars. In Equatorial Guinea, we say that democracy is not an imported product. It is not an imported product and cannot be designed in the offices of other countries. Democracy is formed through the application of the positive values characterizing a society, and only the people are entitled to define the model that best suits them and entitled to beat their own path towards their own development. And with this as our vision, the Republic of Equatorial Guinea in 1982 adopted the experiment of the theory of the democratic experiment, where we saw our own citizens through our community councils having a hand in designing their own political development, the implementation of which has given rise to the current climate of peace, stability, and economic prosperity, and all of this through successive political reforms. The latest of these reforms is making of Equatorial Guinea a modern democratic state in which people's participation and representational politics are now at their peak. The transfer of power is guaranteed through equal rights for all political options. The administration of public affairs is done with utmost transparency, accountability, and responsibility. and human rights are protected and monitored by reliable institutions. In this spirit of ensuring the participation of all Equatorial in the management and administration of public affairs, our government has extended an invitation to all political parties, those within the country and those in the diaspora alike, to attend in this coming November a national dialogue that will be held as an opportunity to strengthen democracy in our country as a positive experience in our democratic experiment, which has yielded fruit since its inception in 1982. And concurrently with this political process, and thanks to the peace and political stability that we have achieved, our government has taken economic initiatives to develop our natural resources and position Equatorial Guinea as an economically emerging country by 2020. On behalf of the people of Equatorial Guinea, I wish to thank those countries that have been cooperating with my government in developing our economic and trade relations. And here I refer especially to the United States, People's Republic of China, the Republic of Cuba, France, Brazil, Russia, and Morocco. In conclusion, and with a fervent wish to see the United Nations recover its leading role in delivering peace, security, and global development, I wish this, the 69th UN General Assembly, every success. Many thanks to you all.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Equatorial Guinea for the statement just made. May I request representatives to remain seated while we greet the President. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Mahinda Rajapaksa, President of the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Mahinda Rajapaksa, President of the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I congratulate Your Excellency Sam Queteta on being elected as the President of the 69th session of the United Nations General Assembly. We wish you success and assure of our fullest cooperation. The theme for this session, delivering on implementing a transformative post-2015 development agenda, is timely. The world has undergone many changes since the UN was created and since the year 2000. Much progress has been made towards achieving the Millennium Development Goals. However, there are multiple challenges that still remain to be addressed. The moral and practical importance of creating an equitable world and a sustainable planet for this purpose cannot be ignored. Mr. President, the Commonwealth, of which Sri Lanka is the current chair in office, accounts for over 1/4 of the UN membership. In November 2013, the Commonwealth heads of government agreed in Colombo to contribute to the process of evolving the new post-2015 Global Development Agenda. They have endorsed the central focus on the eradication of extreme poverty and reaffirmed commitment to sustainable development. The perspective on the post-2015 development agenda is based on shared values and principles contained in the Commonwealth Charter and individual experiences. The Commonwealth leaders encourage others to approach the forthcoming intergovernmental negotiations in a collaborative spirit to achieve a balanced post-2015 development agenda. Mr. President, reducing inequality within and among countries is one of the most transformative goals that have been proposed by the working group on sustainable development goals. We hope that this goal will serve to enhance the voice and representation of developing countries in decision making. The post-2015 agenda must focus on implementation. Achieving the SDGs would be impossible without the political will and dedication of all countries. It must be ensured the failure of the developed countries to fulfill Millennium Goal 8 that call for a global partnership for development is not repeated. In determining goals, countries must not be deprived of policy space to set their own domestic priorities. Instead of asking countries to prioritize domestic spending, there should be focus on a strengthened partnership between developed and developing countries backed by sincere commitment. This is essential for countries in the South to access financial resources and technology that are essential for capacity building. It is vital that we also address structural obstacles and political barriers that prevented the realization of the MDGs, such as unfair trade and investment rules. Creating a supportive international economic environment, enhance investment flows, including from multilateral development banks, and an open multilateral trading regime are important. The role of the UN in advancing international peace, security and prosperity is crucial in the contemporary world. However, in order to gain the confidence and goodwill of the international community as a whole, one of the essential requirements is consistency of standards across the board, without any perceptions of selectivity or discrimination. It is in this context that the current functioning of the system needs examination in order to enhance its credibility. Human rights are used as a tool to implement motivated agendas. With no understanding or appreciation of the complexity of issues in the countries concerned, human rights should be recognized by all as a moral and ethical concept rather than a political tool. External intervention without adequate consideration of the structures in a society and cultural traditions of the countries where such intervention take place inevitably results in destabilization, which is very much in evidence today in most parts of the world. Mr. President, whose conflict Sri Lanka has also become an unfortunate victim of ill-conceived agendas of some in the Human Rights Council, who pays scant regard to the substantial progress achieved by Sri Lanka in reconstruction, rehabilitation, and reconciliation within a short span of 5 years. There is an obvious lack of balance and proportion in the manner in which my country is being targeted today. Disregarding these significant achievements, this is in sharp contrast with the approach to deeply disturbing situations involving humanitarian emergencies elsewhere. Mr. President, for multilateralism to remain relevant and effective, reform of institutions concerned is essential. To be successful, this process must involve depoliticization of the UN systems and mechanisms, and they must stop being hostage to different forms of funding. UN bodies must find ways to work with governments through dialogue, greater understanding of situations, and cooperation, including assistance to strengthen national institutions. This approach, instead of strong arm tactics, must form the heart of multilateral diplomacy in the search for sustainable solutions to global challenges. Mr. President, the 70th year of the UN in 2015 also marks the 10th anniversary of the 2005 World Summit. We, our global leaders, agreed to support early reform of the Security Council. Concrete results in this regard should be achieved next year, at least. Mr. President, climate change is one of the defining challenges of our times. A robust global response needs to be arrived at 2015 on this basis of equity and the principles of common but differentiated responsibilities. Mr. President, the increase of violence in the Middle East is deeply distressing. I reiterate, Sri Lanka support for the early realization of a sovereign, independent, viable and united state of Palestine existing within secure and recognized borders, side by side and at peace with Israel. We look forward to welcoming Palestine as a full member of the UN at the earliest. The international community must assist Palestine to rebuild the country. Sri Lanka firmly believes in the need for solidarity between Asia and Africa, admiring the efforts of the people of Africa to achieve socio-economic development. Sri Lanka has begun a process of reaching out to countries in Africa for exchange of knowledge and expertise in areas of importance. The international community must strongly support the early eradication of deadly diseases in Africa. Mr. President, Sri Lanka remains committed to supporting all multilateral efforts to counter terrorism, deriving from extreme ideologies impacting on people across national frontiers. Terrorism continues to be a grave threat, the security and stability of nations across the globe. Having suffered at the hands of terrorism, Sri Lanka knows well its drastic impact on societies, communities, and institutions founded on democratic traditions and ideals. The international community must strengthen multilateral action on terrorism, including the early finalization and adoption of the UN Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism. Sri Lanka is also committed to support all multilateral efforts to counter terrorism financing, piracy, and all forms of international organized crimes. We wish to recall our appeal to the international community not to support terrorist groups in any way, either direct or indirect. Sri Lanka expressed its concern regarding bombings that kill innocent civilians and even unborn children in many situations across the world. Mr. President, Sri Lanka expressed deep concern regarding unilateral economic measures against developing countries and is a consistent supporter of the call of the UN General Assembly for an end to unjust economic, commercial and financial embargo against Cuba. Unilateral sanctions of this nature, which impact a country's innocent population, are unethical. Mr. President, despite being affected by terrorism, Sri Lanka has achieved most MDGs. Sri Lanka has succeeded in being ranked ahead of all South Asian countries in the 2013 Human Development Index through the adoption of the National Development Strategy, the Mahinda Vision for the Future. The government of Sri Lanka embarked on an inclusive and rural-centric development program. This involved bold policy decisions connected with macroeconomic management, revitalization of agriculture, infrastructure development, including road and expressways, ports and airports, irrigation and water distributions, a strong telecommunication network, and well-distributed urban and township development, resulting in 7.8% GDP growth this year and per capita income of US $3,800 in 2030. It is also a matter of deep satisfaction to recognize that the economic and political empowerment of the people of the North, supported by massive investment in infrastructure and livelihoods, have also contributed to this growth. Sri Lanka's IT literacy grew steadily from a mere 3% in 2005 to almost 50% in 2014. Sri Lanka's Nanasala program, e-Center program, was awarded the prestigious Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation Award as the best rural IT access program in the world. With the end of terrorism in May 2009, in keeping with my responsibilities to my people, large-scale post-conflict reconstruction, rehabilitation, and resettlement initiatives were implemented in the North in a relatively short period of 4 years. Most importantly, democratic structures in the North have been re-established. Elections were held in the Northern Provincial Council in September 2013 after a lapse of 28 years, upholding the democratic traditions in Sri Lanka, which has been consistently protected since 1931, the year we attained universal franchise. I recall in this context the visit of the UN Secretary General of Sri Lanka to Sri Lanka just a week after the conclusion of the conflict, when a new era of peace had dawned. This was a manifestation of the close cooperation between my country and the UN, and our commitment to work together in the future. Mr. President, we continue on a deeply satisfying and a transformative journey in the interest of all the people of Sri Lanka in carrying out this task. We work in accordance with our traditional foreign policy of friendship towards all and enmity towards none. We hope that the international community too will reciprocate and assist Sri Lanka in a domestic process of reconciliation and economic development without exerting undue pressure on us. We have gained inspiration from the words of Gautama the Buddha, who said that the purpose of all human endeavor must be construct order out of chaos and the harmony out of strife. True to these words of wisdom, the government of Sri Lanka remains committed to its objective of pursuing the process of reconciliation and nation building and untended by ill-motivated criticism. Thank you. May the Triple Gem bless you all. Teruvan Sarana.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka for the statement just made. May I request representatives to remain seated while we greet the President.